All right, we're going to get started here
Hi, how are
for
you?
the next,
Yeah.
I would say, most important part of the day. Thank you all. My name is Paola Avila. I'm chair of the Border Trade Alliance, and my day job is vice president at the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce. I have to start by saying this is my favorite conference each year. Whether you are new to the conversation on the U.S.-Mexico relationship and border, or you're an expert, the panelists, the speakers at this conference always provide insightful, thought-provoking comments. And this panel is no exception. We're really pleased to hear and have them here. I'll run through and introduce them, but to kind of frame the conversation, these panelists, they have lived and breathed, and in a couple cases run the border management, ports of entry. So we'll cover a variety of factors that border management entails, which is a very complicated operation. We have to ensure security and at the same time facilitate trade and travel, and do this across the 2,000-mile border. With that entails two countries, their respective local and state governments, politics, the private sector. Good thing that funding is unlimited. Our speakers will talk. Yeah, it was a joke. We know that. We have no money. Our speakers will talk about physical border infrastructure, staffing, implementation of programs such as were mentioned previously, the United Cargo Processing or joint inspections. Perhaps we can talk about southbound inspections as well. What does the 21st century border management look like? New technology, more staffing, additional ports of entry. As Ambassador Bárcena mentioned, they're widely inadequate and need updated and modernization. And then, of course, talking about NAFTA's replacement, the USMCA, and in particular the trade facilitation chapter, the customs chapter. What does it mean for border management and improving efficiencies at the border? So I'm excited to hear what each of you have to say. Well, let's get started. We have with us Gustavo de la Fuente, he with more than 25 years of experience in commercial banking, startups, telecommunications, and media companies. Gustavo serves as the executive director of the Smart Border Coalition, a binational organization based in my hometown in San Diego and Tijuana region. Gustavo is a co-founder of a commercial real estate company in Sonora. He's also on the board of the Kingstone Financial Partners and the board of the International Community Foundation, a nonprofit foundation of choice for U.S. donors who are passionate about protecting the environment and improving the quality of life in Baja California and Latin America. Joining us to his left over there is Jorge Alvarez Tovar. Jorge Alvarez Tovar served for 7 years as technical secretary of the Foreign Relations Commission in the Senate of the Republic of Mexico, and served as the International Affairs Administrator of the Ministry of Finance and Public Credit for 2 years. Since 2015, Mr. Alvarez Tovar has been part of the Tax Administration Service as Coordinator of Advisors, General Customs Administration, and Central Administrator of Customs Planning, and Central Advisor of Customs and International Affairs, serving as the Minister Representative in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us. Most notably, though, I'll say he received the Chamber's Cross-Border Collaboration Award last year on behalf of SAT, where we honored CBP and SAT for their working partnership. So I added that to his resume. Mr. Alangina is co-founder of CT Strategies, which provides strategic services to clients seeking current and innovative insight into border management and supply chain challenges in the U.S. and around the world. Mr. Ginas previously served as Assistant Commissioner for International Trade at the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. As Assistant Commissioner, Mr. Gina oversaw a workforce of over 1,000 employees and a budget of over $300 million, and was responsible for leading the most extensive trade transformation initiative in CBP's history. Throughout his 30-plus year career at CBP and his predecessor agency at the U.S. Customs Service, he's been a pioneer and a leader developing broad and far-reaching national and international programs to support anti-terrorism and trade transformation policies. Mr. Pat Ottensmeyer, joined Kansas City Southern in 2006 as Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer in 2008. He was named Executive Vice President of Sales and Marketing, named President in 2015, and Chief Executive Officer since 2016. Mr. Ottensmeyer has a broad range of experience from various senior executive positions he has held at KCS over the last 10 years, and served as the Chief Financial Officer of Econo Therapeutics Inc. and Corporate Vice President and Treasurer of Dade Bearings Holdings Incorporated, and also served as Vice President of Finance and Treasurer of Burlington Northern Santa Fe Corporation, or BNSF. Thank you so much for joining us, the four of you. So we'll start with opening questions here, just kind of broad questions, but, if you can give an overview. But in particular, for each of you, I'll provide a focus. Alan, if you could start us off from your history and your prior work at CBP, if you could talk to us about the evolution of the CBP and SAT relationship in that history.
So absolutely, it's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank the Wilson Center for this opportunity. Relative to the question, you heard part of my resume. It's in the thing. It's in the material. But I wore the uniform for 15 years in the field at several locations. Came to headquarters, only wanted to spend 5 years here. 9/11 happened. Unfortunately, I became a headquarters lifer. So I had the opportunity to spend and serve at the pleasure of great CBP leadership, Bonner, Basham, Burson. And so I was there right after 9/11. So relative to my background, what was the cooperation? What's that? It was absolutely over the top fabulous. They have always been great partners. You have to put this in perspective. 60,000 employees at CBP currently. 59,995 of them are career personnel. And your leadership at CBP has a long established, evolving relationship with their partners in SAT. I was just telling somebody earlier, I'll close with this to tell you how strong it was. There's an individual, an esteemed individual who recently retired from SAT. He was here stationed in Washington, D.C. Most of you already know who I'm talking about. Mr. Martin. I've constantly reminded him, after being in country for 24 straight years, his children are more American than my child. And that relationship has always been strong, and it continues to be strong. And to close, you'll notice the previous secretary, Ms. Nielsen, always would talk about a relationship with her counterparts. Mr. McAleenan, the incumbent commissioner who's acting as the secretary at this point, always talks about his relationship. Go on any kind of YouTube or whatever query, Robert Perez, the current career deputy commissioner, and he's always talking about a wonderful relationship. So regardless, now that I'm retired, I guess I could say this, regardless of what the rhetoric is out of the White House, the relationship at the agency department level is fabulous.
Thank you, and I think that's critical to note because without that cooperation, we don't have border management on either side.
Absolutely.
You can't run it just one-sided. Mr. Tovar, if you could, from the Mexican perspective and currently at SAT, CBP's counterpart, your perspective, and then the work that you guys are doing today.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula, and it is also great for me to be here and to share this panel with Alan, with Pat, and Gustavo. And thank you to the Wilson Center and the Border Trade Alliance for this opportunity. I will echo what Alan just said. I think that SAT and CBP relationship is at its best. I mean, honestly, I don't know. I don't think that it's been better before. I think, and the thing is that, and sorry, but I'm not a politician, but we spend our days. We don't spend our days thinking on how to keep our jobs. We spend our days doing the job. So we don't need to. So we really take care of the day-to-day basis. So we are building a great partnership. Alan said it very well. My predecessor, Jose Martin, he was here for 24 years, and he helped in that. And we are keeping that up. And I think that these unified cargo processing programs that we have, that you already heard about them, the best thing that they're creating, of course, they're doing a lot of good for the business community, for the stakeholders, reducing the border wait times from 3 hours to 45 minutes, or even in some ports of entry down to 15 minutes. Yes, that's great. But what these pilots are doing, they're creating, or they're building trust between both organizations. They're building trust within both customs officers. And with this trust comes a great partnership. So I totally agree that we are doing great, and we will continue to do so.
Could we have accomplished unified cargo processing without that partnership? I think probably not. I think that's one of the most recent examples and proof of that partnership.
Can I respond
yes,
to that?
of course.
Because many people may not know the significance of that had to be in that partnership. If you go back and you look at pre-clearance, true pre-clearance, not pre-screening, where you're reviewing in like a program, CSI, Container Security Initiative, so you're ensuring things are safe before they get on a vessel. Actual clearance has always been in the air environment. And then people say, well, why has it always been in the air environment? Because the common thinking is once that aircraft leaves and it's airborne, it's not going to get compromised. So to think about why for so long there's never been true pre-clearance of cargo, especially between U.S. and Mexico, U.S. and Canada, is because where you do that clearance, there has to be an extremely high level of confidence that that conveyance is not going to be compromised while it's still on the ground, therefore completely undermining the purpose of pre-clearance. So that requires an absolute not only level of cooperation but trust in both parties to actually go from pre-clearance of air environment to pre-clearance of land environment.
Thank you. And I think it's really important to review that history and the current relationship so that we can figure out how to improve efficiencies at the border, where we go for the future to achieve a truly 21st century border, efficient border. And from the private sector perspective, Pat, if you could talk about the importance, why is this even important? What does it mean for trade, on the ground?
Just capacity and cost and efficiency and competitiveness. We move a tremendous amount of cargo, as Congressman Cuellar mentioned. Laredo, which is our major cross-border gateway, is the busiest cargo gateway across the entire border, whether you're talking about trucks or trains. And there is limited capacity and lots of room for growth. And part of my I call it my elevator speech. I spent a lot of time in Washington promoting NAFTA, USMCA, is to talk about the opportunities that the United States of America has to increase exports to Mexico. Yes, we have a trade deficit with Mexico. Some of that is not politically driven, but there are opportunities in front of us in the next 3-5 years and beyond, I believe, to significantly reduce that trade deficit. And two of the biggest opportunities where our company is investing heavily to build infrastructure and capacity to do that are refined petroleum products as a function of Mexican energy reform, and energy is now part of USMCA. It was not part of NAFTA. And then plastics as a result of all of the petrochemical plants, processors, refineries that have been built in the United States. A lot of those products will go into Mexico for things like electronics and auto parts and water bottles and everything that can be made out of those products. In order for the country to take advantage and really fully realize the opportunities for export growth from the U.S. into Mexico, we have to improve the processes for moving cargo across the border. We can't do it by physical infrastructure. It's just too expensive. And some of the things that I'm sure we'll talk about, whether it's inspections or crews, again, Congressman Cuellar mentioned the international crew. The way a train crosses the border is ridiculous. When we explain it to people, it's like, you guys are in the 18th century.
For those of us who are not familiar, can you just briefly give us an overview? What does that look like?
He mentioned it. The train goes to the middle of the bridge. It's out at the worst possible, the narrowest possible bottleneck. It is a single line bridge, and it stops. The crew gets off, whether it's northbound or southbound, walks back to its home, probably a mile or more. And I'm told that the weather in Laredo can be nasty. The crew gets off, walks back to its home. The receiving crew walks out to the middle of the bridge, gets on, and takes the train across. Not only is that taking up an enormous amount, that's 20 to 30 minutes. So you just think about how much capacity that's soaking up, dead, just because that train is stopped. Within 10 miles of of that point, there are big rail yards on both sides of the border that you can get that train out of the way, 10 miles, out of the way, safe, secure. It's not blocking the grade crossings and interfering with first responders and traffic in those communities, and do the work that's necessary. So if we can change the process, that's just one part of it. Inspections, customs, everything else is a contributor factor as well. Our modeling shows that we could almost double the capacity of that bridge without spending how much money and how much time would it take to build a new international bridge? Without spending hundreds of millions or billions of dollars and taking 5-10 years to do, or as Congressman Cuellar suggested, building overpasses for, I don't know how many, 20, 25 grade crossings. I mean, that's another $1 billion project. So it's processes that we need to focus on to improve the efficiency and take advantage. These products that I talked about, plastics and petrochemicals and refined petroleum products, gasoline, diesel, they want to move by rail. There's not sufficient truck capacity. Mayor Sines, you want those trucks moving through your town. There's not sufficient truck capacity to move those. There's not pipeline capacity to move those. They want to move by rail. And in order for us to take advantage of that, we really need to improve and modernize the processes for moving cargo across the bridge, across the border.
Thank you. And Gustavo please. I prefer at any time jump in. Let's make this most interactive.
This process that Pat already explained, it's crazy to have that, while at the same time, in the same border crossing, we are sharing, in a matter of less than a second, we're sharing the images that we are capturing from our non-intrusive equipment. So we're using the technology in the best of our capabilities. We're doing a great job doing the joint inspections, or we're sharing the images. We are both authorities doing the risk assessment at the same time in microseconds. But at the time you have this process, it's crazy to think about.
Well, if you want to chime in here, this is what Jorge's talking is very, very important, because what you've got is modernity, advancement on one side, then you have the reality on the ground. What's really going on the ground, and what is sometimes preventing things from happening, the transactions from happening faster. So it's a very important thing. It's a dichotomy we live in. It's this contrast, and it happens in various different areas.
And sometimes the processing on one side of the border might move faster than the other. I know that's even with unified cargo processing, still a remaining challenge. So I think that's important to note. Did you want to?
Yeah, most people don't understand. There's several terms of art, and you have to understand the magnitude, because generally if we go into a country in my post-government life and they'll say, hey, we want you to help us create a regional initiative. And then I'll say, well, you've actually maxed out on coordinated border management and cross-border coordinated management. Now, words matter, so hopefully you caught that with my New York accent, right? And they'd be like, no. And I said, so in the U.S., there's 47 agencies that have some degree of equity at the U.S. border. So within the U.S., someone would argue, do you even have coordinated border management amongst your own U.S. government agencies? That is distinctly different, if you can accomplish that, than having now cross-border coordinated management to make sure that your port of entry that's open 8 to 5 on one side of the border, the other side of the border hopefully is not open 4 to 12 at night. And so while you can move traffic one way, you can't move it both ways. And then, at least for North America, you could say that's your regional or trilateral arrangement. And that's extremely difficult and complex, because if it wasn't complex, right after 9/11, a lot of thinking. I mean, I actually worked for some really intellectual, commissioners, those of you who know the resumes of Judge Bonner and Mr. Burson, academic. Besides his Yale and Rhodes Scholars, I don't know how he actually ended up in Harvard's Football Hall of Fame. I'm not sure if the guy ever slept or what he did, but the thinking is Nirvana would have been perimeter security. If you can harmonize all these various complex aspects between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, you would create perimeter security and you would alleviate a lot of the challenges and congestions along the respective borders. But, having said that, unfortunately, that's not the case. And this panel is 21st century, and we're already 1/5 of the way through 21st century. So if I could, I'm just going to give you 2 minutes, which might, allow Mr. Ottensmeyer to tell you exactly what they're doing at Kansas City, which shows that there really is some activities that can be done for getting an ROI, return on investment. If you would ask me a question, I said, first of all, modern customs services or any government agencies have to be able to run their company live, as Kevin Plank from Under Armour promotes, and we're far from it. And what does that mean for me as a former 30-year customs official? Can I make decisions in real time which support supply chain security? Because my responsibility to the United States is not only national security, but promoting economic competitiveness and prosperity, and you can't have one without the other. So can I do that? No, I can't. But as we strive for that, am I utilizing technology to its optimum? Am I really using technology to optimize my workforce effectiveness? The CBP is trying to create autonomous lanes of the future, and that is what you want so you can do what's referred to as screen at speed. Al Gina walking across the border should be no different than Al Gina walking across from New York to New Jersey. As a New Yorker, I'm not sure why I would want to go to New Jersey, and there is technology that should allow me to be screened, and advanced enrollment, global entry, other technology that should allow that.
In many cases, this technology exists. We're not waiting for it to be created.
It's the elephant in the room, biometric, facial recognition. How come we're not getting there faster? But I go to Walt Disney World, and I enter the park in and out with biometrics. I mean, so Fortune 500 companies can do it. It just seems that the government is not there yet. And I will tell you, with 35 plus years of experience, none of this is ever achievable without first and foremost partnerships. Because as alluded to, the supply chain, or you can refer to it as a supply network, at what it's becoming. And if you don't have those partnerships, you're only going to be, going back to the chain metaphor, you're only going to be as strong as your weakest link. So.
And you mentioned 47 agencies just on the U.S. side.
Yes.
Jorge, how many agencies on the Mexican side?
So there are, two. So it's migration, and so as you know, we are not. So migration and customs are separated. But now there's also sanitary, phytosanitary authorities there. So pretty much, but But we don't need them to be at the port of entry. There's no sense for them to be there.
But the coordination
Because
is
we
important.
have the single window where you can, we are coordinating there, right? So electronically, we don't need them to be there. In some cases, yes. There's a need to be inspectors from SENASICA, the phytosanitary agency. But the coordination, I think, yeah, it's key. It's fundamental for good processes, and perhaps I'm jumping ahead, but just USMCA Chapter 7, Customs Administration and Trade Facilitation does a great deal for that coordination. It really, I think it's one of the biggest things that it's putting in the text, that it enhances coordination, not just between the three customs authorities, but within our country's authorities. There is one disposition or one article referring to border inspections, that we are committed, the three countries, we are committing to try to do all the inspections that happen to be at the border, to actually do it at the border, perform it at the border, and when available in the same premises. Because right now, so let's think about a port without UCP. So then it will have a first screening from our SENASICA, from our phytosanitary agency, then a second from customs. Then it crosses the bridge, and then CBP primary, perhaps CBP secondary, and then FDA, and then DOT. So then it's just taking too long. So something that we put in text was, if, of course, it's a matter of investments as well and space in the ports of entry, but if available, to have all those inspections having or being done at once in one same facility. So to do this concept of one-stop shop. Of course, it will take time, yeah, but we're aiming to that, and that is exactly in the text. So I think that's one of the good things, or one of the very positive things that we get in the new USMCA.
And I do want to talk about the new trade agreement, but before we go there, Gustavo, what is the role as, we talk about the private sector of organizations, civic or business organizations, and the role in advancing some of these efficiencies?
No, thank you. Well, I represent an organization called the Smart Border Coalition, okay, just to give you a sense for what this is. So we put together about 75 to 80 different stakeholders from both sides of the border, San Diego and Tijuana, who come to meetings. So we're conveners in many ways. We bring people together. We talk about the issues. It could be access to lanes. It could be technology use. It could be a presidential permit. It could be water issues. So there's a variety of things that we touch on, four key dimensions. One is port and surrounding area modernization, traveler guidance and education, port construction, and traffic management. And pretty much everything falls under those categories. And we've got a very interesting set of leaders for both sides of the border, a leadership comprised of some of the most well-known business people and educators on both sides of the border. So just to give you a sense of what we're talking about, we convene, we meet every 2 months and in between. So in much the same way as the BTA does its work, we have to do it on a regional, local basis. So I cross the border all the time between Tijuana and San Diego, sometimes twice a day. I'm from Nogales, so I grew up on the Mexican side of the border. So you see, and I grew up in business. So when you start looking at this private sector combined with government and academia, then you start seeing the complexity of all these things. But I wanted to touch on a few things regarding that, and I think part of the issues that we have in terms of modernity versus what Alan was talking about, this true pre-clearance, is that on the ground we go through a number of challenges. One of those challenges is the frameworks. what are the frameworks we're going to use? What are the problem statements that our regions have to answer to? And what we see is haphazard things going on at the border. So if you look at proofs of concept going on, of course, you've got a number of ports where things are happening, Canadian side, the Mexican side, or on the U.S. southern border. So you see all these proofs of concept, yet we don't really have a clear notion of what all those projects are. We don't have an inventory of what's really happening in terms of proofs of concept and whether technology is actually taking place and what is working or what is not working, and in terms of timelines. Alan said something about coordination. We believe that we have a huge challenge for coordination. Let me give you an example of that. So most of the border cities have binational plans, right? They've got binational infrastructure plans. You look at the state of Baja California and the state of California. We have binational plans, and everybody refers to them. The state of California is involved, SANDAG, San Diego Association of Governments, California Department of Transportation. They do a lot of work. But what happens is once you start implementing these programs, and I can give you the examples of the San Isidro reconfiguration of that port today. What's happening there? Well, the port is almost done. Reconfiguration is almost done. It's going to be done by August or September. But what happened with the Mexican side of the border? We didn't know. We didn't know what the Mexican side was going to do when it came to those new lanes opening up. Otay 2, new port, wonderful port. The U.S. side has most of the financing done. The land has been bought. The roads have been built. And really, it's just that last segment where they need to build the port. The Mexican side is way behind in this sense. Now, part of this is, yes, the U.S. and Mexico did work together on it. But the other part is, do we have a timeline from the Mexican side to actually get things done? And there's sometimes we don't have that information at our fingertips. Jorge was talking about that cooperation between CBP and SAT, and it is true. I think we've had enormous cooperation locally. One of the things that happened lately, starting in January, was when the former aduanas administrator, Ricardo Peralta, I'm sorry, he was convening people on both sides of the border to actually discuss the details, the technical side of these things, because that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's sometimes where we have the challenges. And one last thing I just want to say about data. We have a data infrastructure challenge at the border. Let me give you an example of that. The California Department of Transportation in our area has a way to measure wait times going to the border. We don't have yet, on the Mexican side of the border, a way to tell wait times in real time, if you can believe that. And there's a number of borders where that happens. So why is that so important? Well, it's important because if you look at the border as a system, if you look at the border as a node or as an ecosystem, it's really very difficult to see what the impacts of this traffic going forward, backwards in a circular fashion is going to have on the ports. So this is very important that we have that wait time information. Same for cargo and for vehicles. But if we do that, then that lends itself to a number of different applications. But again, we have to really concentrate the efforts of academia, government, private enterprise, civil society on let's focus on a border solutions type of an alliance.
And Alan, you mentioned you made a comparison to Walt Disney. When you go to Disneyland, you can download an app and it'll tell you what the wait times are for each ride. They can figure it out. I think we can too. It would be, right? I mean, you would think. Pat, you talked about the challenges for rail capacity, process. What are the solutions? What are some, and you touched on it, but if you can give us some idea on that, and if this trade agreement, the USMCA, can be helpful in accomplishing that.
Yes, it's really and just going back to the discussion about how many agencies, and we've been working on some of these things for 5 or more years, and as I've said, as we work through some of these issues, you need a really big conference room because you've got so many people on both sides of the border, and I don't want to. I mean, I completely agree with everything that's been said. the cooperation locally between all of ththese agencies is really phenomenal. And again, picking up on something that Congressman Cuellar said, if you go spend time at the border and you see how cooperative and how inextricably linked these communities are, it's refreshing and makes you feel like the world outside of Washington is generally a better place. But that aside. But it's just a combination of all these things. It's infrastructure, it's technology, it's process, it's USMCA, as Jorge mentioned, has some things that are helpful. And we're making good progress. I have enjoyed the company of Congressman Cuellar on 2 occasions in the last year, cutting ribbons in Laredo, Texas. Mayor Sines is here. To open a joint cargo inspection facility in Laredo, Texas, where the Mexican and U.S. inspection for northbound freight is going to take place in a unified cargo environment. And then we opened another one in our yard in Laredo, Texas, where secondary cargo inspection, again, unified cargo inspection. So each one of these, we're just kind of knocking them off one at a time, because unfortunately there are so many people involved, you have to do it that way. And we're definitely making progress. The technology, there's no doubt. It's there. And I kind of, as I was thinking about this, why can't we do what they do at Walt Disney World? Have you guys considered hiring Mickey Mouse as a consultant? And I think to some extent it's, why invest in technology if you don't have the path to use it? Right. And so, but that could change really quickly. I mean, this technology's available. It's not all that expensive. I mean, it's expensive, but it's not like you're, starting from scratch. It could be used and it could be employed pretty quickly, and we just need to clear the path, really from I'd say from a legal regulatory standpoint to be able to take advantage of it. And it feels to me, particularly with the changes in the USMCA and the breakthrough, hopefully, if we get this approved and we remove some of the impediments and the cloud of uncertainty, that we can start to accelerate the progress.
Thank you. That was I think a really great overview. Anybody wanted to say anything?
No, I think the most relevant, everything he says is relevant, right? And I caught myself there. But I think it's, people don't use the technology. I think if we can have a whole discussion on this. You may not need to expand the infrastructure. And I ask clients on occasion, why are you harping on, I need more staff, I need more staff, I need more people? You just want your people, the passengers, cleared quicker. You just want your cargo cleared quicker. If workforce optimization should be as defined is you hire the right people, you train them accordingly, you support them with proper legislation, you augment the legislation with proper regulations, you provide appropriate, with some degree of flexibility, standard operating procedures so that Newark, New Jersey isn't being treated like Laredo, Texas, and then you augment them with technology and you operationalize the technology accordingly. There are so many places around the world that ask us to come in and help them, and we just say, you put your technology at the wrong place. You're not using it. And if you do that, I don't think anybody has ever determined, do we really need to expand the infrastructure or do we really need to hire more people? If everybody used global entry, they have an app for passengers coming in, they have mobile capability, it would be amazing how much less staff would really be needed.
Yeah, that's a good point. And this perspective that you have today, what is it a combination of your time in the public sector and the private sector? How did it change, or what did you learn anything different moving into the private sector?
Now we didn't prepare this, but this is interesting. So I'm allowed for the candid response that somebody has asked me that recently. What's the difference when you were in the government And now that you're in private industry, and you gotta remember, I spent my whole adult life, so I'm 61, 30 plus years in the government, so I really didn't spend a lot of time in the private sector before the last 5 years. And I said, I could have had a mediocre year in the government, and I'm guaranteed I'm going to probably get a budget next year. Have a mediocre year in the private sector, and we'll all be telling each other how great we are on the unemployment line. And, you know, I believe I had, because of people, there's a woman, Kathy, in here, and the NCBFAA and others constantly reminded me about what it's like to meet bottom line, to meet payroll. The margins aren't 50%. The margins are like 2%. And everything you and your 46 other government agencies has a real impact on us. Mm-hmm. And I think many people have an appreciation of that. But now being in the private sector, I'd like to say I have much more of an awareness. So the need for these technologies, the need to move at speed, to run your company live. You know, I just highlighted Under Armour because they were up in Baltimore, and we had an opportunity to go there and get educated by their chief data officer. And when he explained it, I'm saying, okay, so now you have companies running their operations live. And just as a perfect example for those who may not know, simply put, they know when their client needs a new pair of running shoes 2 weeks before those shoes are going to wear out, so that they're mailing them their shoes. That's what numerous examples, but that's what they talk about running your company live. If CBP or any other government agency, both on the south side of the border and us, can also give responses to the trade community in real time, so those shipments don't have to stand hours or days congesting his rail yards, taking precious space away. So you won't maybe not need to expand it. If decisions can be made in real time relative to passengers, why do you need to expand what are called federal inspection sites, FISs, where you go in and there's this massive congestion? So that was the perspective before and the perspective after.
I think that's very useful. Perhaps, with the exception of Jorge, who's brilliant, perhaps every government official should be work in the private sector before working in government. If you reverse that, if what you know today, could have helped you yesterday.
I mean, you're pretty astute. The Dutch allow for their customs officials to take a sabbatical and go into the private industry, and they guaranteed employment when they return back to the Dutch customs to gain that awareness. Yeah.
I did work for the private sector for 3 years.
Oh, there you go. Okay, no wonder. We are going to open it up to questions from the audience. So if anybody's ready, if not, I have a few more. Just wanted to give you that heads up so you can start prepping your questions. Any questions yet? Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, Mr. Gina, I know
Hello,
that
how are you, sir?
Just great, sir. In addition to the Trusted Trader program, especially in Port Laredo, I know that to maybe throw a little plug for you as well. I think the outreach is an opportunity to go out there and get more participants involved, because I think we're doing 7,500 trucks a day and only 2,000 are involved in let's say CT-PAT or fast lane. Is there anything else that we could do in addition to certain policy changes? Because I know that, just realistically, there's certain things that we could tweak out a little bit to get more participants.
Well, I guess I would have to first explain what a Trusted Trader program is. In the U.S., it's now called CT-PAT. Historically, it was called Carrier Initiative Program, Super Carrier Initiative Program, America's Counter-Smuggling Initiative, Business Alliance to Secure Commerce, which is now industry-led, is now called Business Alliance to Secure Commerce, right? And most of the time, I think in Mexico, it's called NEC. I think in Canada, it's called PIP. You enroll in a program. You say, if I'm trusted, I, Al Gina, am willing to give you any and all information you want, and in return, I get expedited clearance. So the CT-PAT has about 10,000, 12,000 companies. It should not be confused with a program called Importer Self-Assessment. You have to remember on these Trusted Trader programs, the supply chain, if you're trying to protect the security of the supply chain conveyance, you're generally trying to do it to prevent narcotics or other illicit items from compromising that conveyance to be used as a conduit to get it to a place of destination. That is very different. Somebody can have tremendous supply chain security on their conveyance, but have terrible commercial compliance activities, such as they're declaring it incorrectly, they're falsifying country of origin, they're not doing valuation correctly. And that should also not be confused with a third option of, does the company practice sound financial practices? So in answer to the very well experienced, informed individual, your answer quite candidly is sometimes people will go into the CT-PAT program because it's the security. But I don't know, maybe my cynicism says they want willful blindness of not going into the ISA because that requires auditing and opening one's book. So if somebody truly wants to be a trusted partner, they have to be able to expose their entire company in order to get the benefits of what a trusted partnership is. Generally, the contentiousness comes around. People always say, I want more benefits, I want more benefits. Well, the U.S. examines like less than 5% of cargo coming into the United States anyway, and trusted partners get examined like 1%. You know, there's a gentleman who said 1%, I'll use that as my own internal control just to make sure my own company is doing what it's supposed to be doing. I usually challenged when I was back at the government, if you really want to exhibit yourself as a good corporate citizen, you should just do it. There's a T-shirt, I think. Just do it.
Jorge, do you want to add to
Yeah,
that?
I will just add that. So we've been. I mean, to answer the question, yes, I think the. So the UCP program. So we did it at the beginning at let's say at an environment where we feel safe and we thought will be. I mean, we feel comfortable with it. So that's why we began with a couple of pilots and with just a couple of industries. And, of course, just the trusted traders. And it's been evolving since then. So we have now 13. And in some ports of entry, it's for the 100% of the shipments. Of course, those are small ports of entry that have not big numbers in terms of operations. And the industries that process their shipments there are very, we will say not high risk. But I think it is, the pilot is getting mature enough to begin a further expansion. Not just about going to another mode of transportation, which actually we are going to also open in a pilot perhaps in the next couple of months in the maritime environment, but also to have more companies, more industries involved in this. So far, we have around 400 companies benefiting from this. We need more than that. We want more than that. We have around 13 or 14 different industries. We want more. We are working together, of course, with CBP. For instance, in Nogales, we want to have the fresh produce using the UCP. We need to work on that. It's very complicated for them. We know that to be certified as CT-PAT or AEO, but we need to find a way of get them involved in this in these programs and have a good use of this unified cargo processing. And let me I will just add one. We've been talking about infrastructure and processes and competitiveness and efficiencies, and we haven't talked about risk management. Not directly. Somehow, Alan mentioned it. So these AEO programs, it's precisely this, risk management. If you open your information to the authority, and we are confident, we feel good with your information, we know that you are a trust trader, then you will get less than 1% of, let's say, red lines. So in order for us to get a better risk management, we need more information. We need better information. So if the better information we get, and of course in advance, the easier will be for us to process the shipments, and of course, the faster it will be for you to cross the border.
Any other questions, Sam? And then we'll go back. Mike is coming on its way.
Sam Bibb with the Border Trade Alliance. Now, Al, you go way back, and Jorge's new, but you're all saying, trust me, the government. That's what you're saying. And when we go to Mexico City and we try to have meetings together with businesses and we say we're going to invite SAT, they say, no, we don't want to have anything to do with that. So there is an issue there in terms of confidence in what the government has access to. And so as far as I know, you don't have the best internet connections, you don't have the most secure systems in the world, and with what's going on in the international intrusion business, I think it's something that the government needs to settle on what they're going to do and what they need to make a decision. They don't need to know your competitive business activities, but they do need to know that you're declaring things honestly. There's a difference.
Right.
I'd like you all to comment on that.
Sure. So Mr. Vail is talking about proprietary information. It's always been a challenge of private industry being reluctant to provide information to the government because of the sensitivity of that information. It's a valid and appropriate concern, but I think in fairness, I'd like to add for my former colleagues that of anywhere in the world, CBP, the U.S. government, is probably the most aggressive in maintaining partnerships. There's something called the Commercial Operations Advisory Council. It's by FATCA law. Every 3 months, you have an open forum that anybody in this room can sign into the website, and you hear the discussions and the dialogues about every initiative that's ongoing between the government and the industry at large. There's 20 elected members that represent the industry, and they serve 2-year terms, and they rotate, and they can only send, I think, 2 consecutive terms. They also have a trade symposium meeting, which is, I'm going to date myself, it's like, the hottest ticket. It sells out, faster than, Whitney Houston used to sell out. But it said only 1,000, and they tried to do it one on the East Coast, and then the West Coast said it takes us all day to travel back and forth. And nowhere in the world. I've traveled most of the world. I attended the World Customs Organization. It represents 182 countries. Nowhere else does that. Yes, it sometimes hampers what's referred to as the single window. Submit once, use multiple times. As Mr. Ottenmeyer has indicated, X-ray once, send the images multiple times. It always comes down to, if we send it somewhere, are all those parties trusted? We're going back to Deputy Secretary Michael Jackson, who wanted to do what was called a global trade exchange, and he couldn't get agreement in the room. He basically held up his credit card and said, why can I go anywhere in the world and my credit card will be accepted? And I only gave one entity my information. But I can use it anywhere, 180 countries. But somehow we can't seem to come to something like that amongst this community. He even said, let's reside it at the World Customs Organization. All the data that can be then used to do advanced data analytics to kind of screen at speed. You wouldn't have to expand another bridge or any other plaza or anything. So that's my transparency on behalf of my former colleagues.
Does
I want to
anybody
say
want
something.
to add?
I think Sam Vail is getting to a very important concept, which typically we'll talk about efficiency and security at the border, and we'll talk about them being not mutually exclusive. But then there's this issue of trust. Do we actually trust the U.S. or the Mexican government to get things done? And I like the fact that USMCA is codifying some of these things. So AEO, it's risk management, it's a single window, use of information technology. So it seems to be binding the parts into doing something. Obviously, it won't tell you, here's what you need to do to get there. We have to figure that out. But again, coming from my standpoint of civil society, We need to push those levers. We need to knock on those doors. We need to be persistent and ask the authority what happened with this or what happened with that. An example of this is, with this risk management, is that we as a coalition started looking at the Otay Mesa port of entry. And we actually did a sampling, we still do it, of trucks crossing the border. One of the problems we have is that people just don't want to share the information. So as a binational group, a nonpartisan group at that, what we've asked the trade community is to give us information, not for every single thing they have crossing the border, not for every single conveyance, but some of them. So we have enough of a sample to produce information binationally so that we can share that information with the agencies. That's a different story. But the agencies sometimes don't want to receive that information for a variety of reasons. But I think we need to go in that direction where there are some binational organizations where we collect that information in a very objective way. We have the raw data, we process that data, and we show it to the binational community, whether that's cargo or that's anybody who wants to cross the border, because we really haven't. I know a lot of this is about trade, but it's much more than trade. It's about people who want to cross that border every single day. It's the exchange that Ambassador Bárcena was talking about. It's a social exchange. It's an educational exchange. And so we have this movement. And it's very, very important that we look at those aspects of the relationship as well. And risk management is involved in that as well for people crossing.
Thank you. And we're out of time, but I do want to let you ask us a very quick question.
I'm wondering, we have two borders, and I'm just wondering if there are any successful strategies or procedures that are used with the Canadians that could be applied to the southern border.
I'll take a first shot at that. I mean, some of the things that I talked about in terms of the way trains cross the border, we're basically replicating what happens between Canada and U.S. So and I don't know, I mean, I think it's kind of across the board. We would make enormous progress if we could replicate what happens in Canada at the southern border. Now, we want to go beyond that because I know that there are some things going on with Canada, use of technology. But if we could just get parity with Canada, we'd be much better off.
That's what you mentioned, the standardization and harmonization. Did you want to?
Exactly. Just that. So we're harmonizing data. So and we are aiming to have a trilateral single window. So at the same time, I mean, with one click, the three border authorities will have the exact same information, the exact same set of data set to do the risk analysis. So then a shipment coming from Montreal to Monterrey, just crossing the U.S., it will just click once and we will be seeing the same information and doing the risk analysis. And of course, I know that CBP is also replicating a lot of things with the Canadians in their border, the shared border, in terms of UCP, etc. But we definitely are talking trilaterally in a lot of things. And I mean, of course, the USMCA has a lot on it.
If I could just give an example based on expounding and your question about the northern border and particularly the rail lines, so that all my comments aren't perceived as possibly aspirational. Here's about as close to screening at speed that's out there, and to talk about the ingenuity. So you have large-scale imaging equipment. That's imaging is generally meaning X-ray versus radiation portal monitors, which are passive and they're trying to detect if radiation. So you have large-scale imaging equipment that used to move over a conveyance. So the conveyance stayed stationary, and you would drive this over. When we first started deploying these in '96, we used to pull large tractor trailers through 6 or 7 stationary, almost like a car wash, pulling it through, and you get these X-ray images. All of a sudden, the engineer said, well, on the northern border, why don't we keep the technology stationary? We'll figure out the algorithms or whatever it tells, and we'll let the trains drive through them. And then we'll take the images and we'll just remotely Why do you have to be sitting 20 feet from there? Why can't that image be sent to where the port of entry is? And so now you have these conveyances driving through this technology, and it's about, so people who maybe have never heard that term, screening at speed, it's a proof of concept. It's being done. It's just a matter of, taking that and replicating that or modifying it into other areas.
Thank you. And with that, I'd like to, just for fun, want to ask, it's a yes or no question. Is it feasible to close the border? It's a threat that we've heard a couple times. Yes or no? Just for fun.
I thought you were going to ask me if I'm still a New York Met fan. That I was yes. Closing the border.
I don't want to get that sensitive.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. At least in my career, we never closed the border. That even after 9/11, the border was never technically closed. Traffic was brought to a screeching halt, where the consequence undermining the U.S. economic situation was catastrophic, but the border was never closed.
Pat, for
No.
private sector.
No.
You heard it here. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for our panelists for joining us.